Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Calbar's Corner for this week's Whatcha Playing Wednesday. I am Lord Calbar Geiler, companion of the Meridian Cross, companion of the Argent Comet, companion of Falcon's Faith, and Reaper, coming to you live, as always, from the Barony of the Osprey on the southern coast of Meridies. I'm all alone this week. It's just me here, folks, but we've got a fun topic for the evening. Going to dig into a little game theory. This is something I've talked about doing. I did one previously on the Morris Alkirk conspiracy. But I realized we talk a lot on this channel about dice. And we use them for most of the games we play, but we really just look at what are dice? What are we talking about? So for this sort of a class 20-ish minute talk, it's going to be a short one. Don't get too comfortable. When I say dice, we're talking about anything that is an object that is tossed, thrown, or dropped that's used for random number generation, right? So a lot of the games we play that are chase or race games, even some of the war games, are determined by either the winner is determined, or even obviously just dice games. The winner is determined by the number or pips or side or whatever that's showing on the dice. So that random number generation is really an important part of a lot of games. But we never really look at where the dice come from, or what do we mean when we say dice. So obviously here on Calbar's Corner, since we're currently at least in a strictly digital means, all of our dice are literally a random number generator. So either through Roll20 or Board Game Arena or whatever, it's a computer. I click a button, I tell it I want a number between this number and this number. It gives me a number. So with that, obviously they're all even. There's an equal number of chance between, if I want a 1 through a 6, the chance I'm going to go 1 through 6 are even. That's not always the case with dice in period or even dice in modern times. So let's look at that in what I'm calling tonight, Dice, a survey. So again, I forgot my background. How dare I? There we go. So we're talking about dice, right? Anything that's a random number generator, right? Now, in modern times, we have, if you play D&D or Warhammer or any board game for that matter, you've seen a lot of different kinds of dice, what we call polyhedral dice. More than just the common, when I say dice, people think of a 6-sided die. And these are some pictures from both early Egyptian, Roman periods into some of the later wooden carved dice. They're 6-sided, fairly simple. But there are much more types of dice than just those 6-sided dice. Let me make this a little bigger so we can see it a little better. You don't need to see me as much. You want to see the cool stuff. So we're talking about dice. We also have the sort of oddities, right? So 6-sided dice are fairly common. Everybody recognizes those. But we have sticks. We have 4-sided dice. We have sort of a weird little rolling ball over there that I think were 4-sided dice that just got messed up. And then, of course, we have things like Knuckle Bones, which are technically a 4-sided die, and we'll get into some specifics about that here in just a second. But obviously, there's more than just that, even those. So, what is the earliest we know of for dice? Where do dice come from? Let's start with that, right? And then sort of I've got a little bit of a timeline here that I found. So this timeline comes from awesomedice.com, and I'll thank them for letting me shamelessly steal their thing. They didn't tell me I could. I just grabbed it because it's a really great thing. But yeah, awesomedice.com, and I've got the link here. I can post out afterwards. So in their first line here, they show and I've checked a lot of these dates. Most of them are fairly confirmed through about 100 years either way. So the earliest we can see is Senate. We've done Senate here on this channel. And it uses dice sticks or dice coins. Basically, it's a 2-sided playing piece. It was used for randomization. Usually there's more than one, usually 4 to 5. It's in use to determine a number. So you see those in the 3100 BCE range. Strictly from hieroglyphs, right? A lot of the ones where they've recovered playing pieces. They haven't recovered as many of the random number generators in this case. But from the rules, the hieroglyphs we found, we're guessing that the 2-sided pieces that we're seeing are a dice or a die. Now, not too long after that, in 3000 BCE, they found a pyramidal die and a two-sided die in Turkey, along with some other gaming pieces. These are actually on display, I think, at the Hermitage, or have been at some point. I've seen parts of this display before. I know there's a set of that little pig dude comes from, that they found some more. They're assuming are game pieces, but they don't really know what game they were used for. I would guess probably something of a hounds and jackals sort of variety based on the playing pieces, but that's my layperson's opinion. So moving on, we have looking at, and also in the 3000 BC, I thought this was a really interesting thing. It's not dice specifically, but it's actually a scoreboard. Now, I give this a little bit of credence because it's one of those things of not every post hole is actually a sacred post hole. Some of them are just holding up fences. But these were what they're saying is holes are punched into a clay floor in Mexico that are similar to modern dice game scoreboards like cribbage. It also looks like it could be used again for hounds and jackals, or another like Nyout, or sort of circular race games. You could use it with pegs, or any other sort of you could use it just as a counter as well. Now, we see pyramidal dice in 3000. We see two-sided dice in 3100. We don't see pyramidal dice again popularly until 2600 BCE in Sumeria, when you look at the Royal Game of Ur. Now, this is where pyramidal dice have really become popular, at least from our modern reckoning of it. Royal Game of Ur is the one that uses it most commonly. Now, it doesn't actually use four-sided die, and we'll get into some of the specific about this sort of dice here in a minute. It actually uses a two-sided, four-sided die. So instead of having four numbers on it, it's just using a 1 or a 0 or a 1, a dark or a light. But they are physically pyramidal D4s, which is kind of interesting. Now, the first cubical dice that we find, what we know as our modern D6s, were found in about 600 years later, 2000 BCE, in some Egyptian tombs. Don't have exact dates or details on those, but that's when we're starting to see the cubical dice coming out. Now, that doesn't mean they didn't have cubical dice before that. We'd have no record of them before that time in that region. Now, so we have D4s, we have D6s. Everybody who plays medieval games knows Knuckle Bones. The primitive dice, right? So now, the problem with identifying Knuckle Bones as dice is they're just bones. So unless you find them stored somewhere separately, in this case in a tomb, it's really tough to identify them in grave goods because they're just bones. So unless they're sort of preserved in a bag or a box or like with coins, they may not be as obvious. But 1333 BCE, or we know that was a set of knuckle bones used for gaming. Now, this next slide I think is really funny. So I'm going to back up here. So we're looking at 3100 BCE to 1333. So 1600 years, 1800 years, give or take. My math is terrible today. 1188 BCE. The approximate date that Sophocles said that dice were invented by Palamedes during the siege of Troy. I think Sophocles was wrong. Now, Palamedes did come up with some dice theories, and he did invent maybe the modern interpretation of dice. He clearly did not invent dice. It was something they've been using for at least a few thousand years before that. But Sophocles, I guess, needed to write something. We found another instance of cubical dice. This with standard pit markings. It makes a derivation here because the D6s are not always marked the same. These are the ones we see with what we know as standard pit markings, the 1 through 6 in the standard formation, roughly 900 BCE in Tuscany, or the Tuscania dice in Rome. We also find cubical dice in 600 BCE in Chinese excavations. So Chinese have a couple of different dice games and a couple of different board games that use dice for movement. There's also the Toffel. There's a Toffel variant that uses dice for movement as well. So not all dice games, not only dice games use dice, other games use dice too. Looking at oldest written records of dice, I have again a bit of problem with this that writing, since we have hieroglyphic evidence of dice, but that's not a written evidence. It's a picture. Take with that what you will. But here's there's a Sanskrit epic that talks about dice and using dice around 400 BCE. Now, for you D&D fans out there, this picture pops up on a lot of the D&D boards occasionally. 300 BC, the oldest D20 or 20-sided dice was found in that region, which I think that's a really neat thing. These are clearly much harder to carve and much harder to conceptualize. And this may be where we look at what Sophocles and Palamedes did. This may be what they mean by sort of the invention of dice, is some of these less easy to construct. A 6-sided cube and a 2-sided coin or a 2-sided stick are fairly easy to construct. The D20, the D12, the D14, a little harder to conceptualize without some pretty in-depth math skills. And I realize I'm not on the comments page, so if somebody says something, there you go. Icosahedron, yes. Yes. Thank you, guys. And then, so you see both the D20 and the D14 there. Those are both found. What's really cool, I think, is this is a D20 found in Egypt and a D14 found in China about the same time period. Now, we know that we had a lot of trade going through there with horse peoples, Scythians, that in that crowd moving around. So it's not surprising that there are dice popping up on both sides of that, either through trade or just through literally invention on both directions. But we see those popping up both sides there. Now, let's look at each of those. So we've seen dice sticks, dice coins, cubicles, and then the weird ones, the D20s, D14s. What are the differences, right? Obviously, size and numbers are different, but like, how are they used? Let's look into some of that. And this is really where I started focusing on some of my, I guess, math theory, and where I think it's really interesting what we do here on Cowboys Corner, because when you're using things like Board Game Arena or Roll20, and it's a random number generator, right? It's fair. It's completely even. It's completely fair. There's no way to cheat it. I mean, like, you can code cheat it, whatever, but it also isn't actually random, right? Anybody who knows anything about computers knows that computers are not capable of achieving random, whereas a dice is, or a die is, because of the chaotic nature of it. Now, depending on how that die is made, it is more or less skewed in one direction or the other. So obviously, in modern day, in medieval times, whatever, a scoundrel, a cheat, a skate, as it were, would have been able to make dice and modify dice to give the house and or the player an edge. So we're playing here on Cowboys Corner. You don't have that option. We don't have the option to switch in loaded dice. Not saying you should ever do that unless it's agreed upon ahead of time. You're sort of aware of it, but I do find it interesting that when you're looking at random number generators versus dice, it does seem to actually affect how the game is played. I know personally, I am much better with physical dice in my hand than I am with random dice, and that's even without actually cheating. There's something about my luck as a person that rolling actual dice seems to do better. So, just a little quirk of mine, I suppose. All right, so let's look at dice sticks. I've got dice sticks here as a category. This is literally anything that's two-sided. So this counts with coins. You could flip quarters, you could flip cowrie shells in this case, or we see a lot of dice sticks that are usually 2 to 3 inches, and are usually marked on one side and not marked on the other. Now, the weird thing about these, in my opinion, one, I'm terrible at throwing them. I despise using dice sticks, and I try to avoid games that use them, because for some reason, even like I cannot toss them effectively. I will throw them off the table. Don't know why. But they're really interesting because it doesn't actually have an even distribution, right? So with a single dice stick, one side's convex. No, yes, convex, that's correct. Humped. And one side's generally flat, which means it's more likely to roll one side or the other, depending on how it's thrown. So there is a skill base to it, right? Even if it's perfectly weighted, perfectly adjudicated, like, it's still going to favor one side or the other, depending on how it's tossed. and it does affect the game. Now, you're also generally using more than one. 4 to 5 seems to be common through most games, which gives you a number variation of 0 to 4, or 0 to 5, 0 to 4, depending on how many you're using. Up to, I guess you could toss 10, have 0 to 10. But the interesting thing that this does that other dice don't is it does give you the option for a 0. Now, a lot of games won't just be 0 to 5. It'll be 0 dark sides is actually the good thing. Give you a 10, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or it'll be like 1 and 2 gives you 4, and then 3 gives you 6. Or there's usually some weird distribution. That's actually one of the largest variances I've seen in doing some research on some of these games is what the dice mean. And again, it doesn't really matter, right? We're talking about the distribution for the actual dice themselves here, but it does give you a really weird range. And because it allows for a 0, you have that option, right? And I think having a 0 on a die is really interesting. I know when we're doing Roll Game of which again uses D4s, which we'll look at in a second, but they are so they're pyramidal dice, but they're marked with a dark or light corners. So they're actually effectively working as dice sticks, but they're evenly distributed dice sticks, right? So it fixes one problem. I like the fact that there's a 0 because the game you're looking at a 0 to 5 as your movement. That realistically changes the game a lot when you're not guaranteed to progress at least one. So we see these all throughout history. We see in cultures. You'll see cowrie shells used for main games like Mancala as counters, but also used in the same cultures as a number generator. You see the dice sticks used in Nori and Korean games, Nyaut. You see them in Senate. So obviously 3100 BCE, we have the version of these dice sticks. They can be ornate down to obviously, like top left corner, we have very ornate carved ones that are charred on that one side, or sort of just simple. It's scratched on one side, not scratched on the other. Fairly simple. All right. So I mentioned D4s for Senate. And these pictures they come from turtlebay.org and westerndigs.org. So check those out if you want to. So another version of dice sticks that I almost left out of this when I first, and then when I searched, I was like, oh yeah, I need to include those too. And most people think of these as Viking dice, are the rectangular 4-sided die. Now, these are 4-sided dice and not dice sticks, at least from my vernacular, because they do have 4 options. So there's usually a 1, 2, 3, and 4. But they could, like the D4s for Senate, be marked dark or light, right? So you do have the same option, but they are rolled differently. So there's not just a 1 or 2. You do have to sort of roll them, toss them so that they tumble. Now, there is a version of this die that are shorter, that are used for the Viking Liar's Dice or Maya or Meter, that have numbers on the ends. And that does function a little differently, and we'll talk about those when we get to the D6s. I didn't include pictures of those, but I will mention them. So when you're looking at D4s, either the pyramidal style or the rectangular style, each of them gives you a number 1 through 4. Now, realistically, you could number them 0 through 3 or 107 and 46. Right? It's A, B, C, and D. It doesn't matter. It's a random generator. But the important part is each of the sides is evenly distributed. So you have an equal chance of getting each of your 4 options. Now, obviously, that depends on the construction of the thing. So we see here like the ones that are the more modern ones that are machine generated. Even those, when we're playing some of our games, we have dice that run kind of hot. We start checking them because they get air bubbles and mistakes, and that will cause them to roll differently. But and obviously, as they get used, they will tend to favor one side or the other. Now, so we talk about dice sticks. We move into the stick dice, or D4s, and then the pyramidal D4s, also used instead of these dice sticks. So those kind of interesting go together. Another 4-sided dice that exists is Knuckle Bones. Now, I don't consider these dice in the rest of the categories of dice because I don't like using them for games because one, I don't like kind of read them, and two, they're I don't like the distribution of them, but I do like playing games with them that are designed for Knuckle Bones. Now, so with Knuckle Bones, they are four-sided. Generally, it is each side is the two long sides, so the two flat sides are 1 and 2, and the two short sides are the what you were seeing there is the shorter sort of sides of them are 3 and 4. Again, you can renumber those. You can give them whatever numbers you want. I know when Sir Joffrey runs the Cock and Feather Gaming Tavern, he has a large knuckle bone that sits in the middle of the table that is numbered so that everybody can sort of agree on here's the numbers we're using, and then you play with this smaller sort of handheld ones. And I like that because it keeps everybody sort of agreeing on the table. That's one of the problems with knuckle bones is remembering which side is which number when you're playing. So make sure when you step up to the table with knuckle bones that you figure that out before you start throwing money at the table. Now, each number can be read as 1 through 4, just like with pyramidal dice, or A, B, C, or D, or you could paint a sun, moon, star, and clover on it, whatever you wanted. But the probability of these is unlike pyramidal dice, is not even because obviously every one of the die is different because these are naturally growing things, and 2 of the sides are larger than the other two of the sides, and even those 2 sides are not identical. So will be one side that will favor more than the others, and that will change per die. I know it's one of the things you sort of as you play knuckle bones in taverns, you can sort of start learning. Oh, these roll 3s more than they roll 2s. They roll 2s more than they roll 4s, or whatever. You can sort of start figuring out some of the patterns, and it helps in your betting a little bit. Now, last but not least, and then we have another slide of the rest of the history there. We have our 6-sided dice, the classic D6. Obviously, each of these reads the numbers usually 1 through 6, usually with pips. In more modern dice, we see numbers on them. I really like the ones with numbers on them. It just makes it easier to sort of faster to read. But there are some games that you need the pips on them, or the dots on them for the game itself. So your mileage may vary on that. This, like the 4-sided dice, doesn't allow for a 0. So you're starting off with a 1 unless you were to number them differently. Obviously, you can number them 0 through 5, right? But the more dice you have, obviously, the higher your range gets. But remember that the bottom number of your range, is always going to be the number of dice. So if you roll 2 dice, 2 is now your lowest number. If you roll 3 dice, 3 is now your lowest number. So if you're rolling, a game of craps or hazard, 2 through 12 is your range because you're rolling 2 d6s. Benefit of the 6-sided dice versus the knuckle bones or the dice sticks is the probability is again even. So every one of those dice is designed, if cut correctly, to roll a 1 through 6 with even probability. Which means when you start adding multiple dice together, your dice range is skewed. So your middle number is like 7, will have a higher probability than your 2s or your 12s. And there's a whole bunch of math and bell curves for that I won't get into. But when you're looking at the probability of those numbers versus like if you take the dice sticks, so 5 d6s versus 5 dice sticks, or even 2 d6s versus 5 dice sticks, the probability of rolling a 7 versus probability of rolling a 7 are very different probabilities. So do that math if you want to, or just let the dice gods decide. But understand there is some probability difference there. Now, when making 6-sided dice, obviously these are all cubes. As I mentioned in the dice sticks, there are some 6-sided dice because those dice, the stick dice, the rectangular dice. Obviously, those are 6-sided dice as well. They do have flat ends because they are so long they generally won't stand up on a roll. There are ones of these that are about 2 cube widths, so the length is double the width. They do have numbers on the ends, usually the 1 and the 2. And those are used in one very specific game. I've never seen them used in one game, the Viking Liar dice or Maya meter. That obviously the probability of rolling that 1 or 2 is going to be significantly lower than rolling the 3, 4, 5, or 6, similar to knuckle bones. So it's a really interesting variation of that. And I'd be curious to dig in a little more about where who figured out, take a stick, cut it down. Oh wait, we should make it a cube versus a double cube, and or sort of who decided to do that arrangement. But makes for an interesting game. That when I was first looking at mine, I think I covered this in the when we did Viking Liar's Dice, and I was drinking that night, so who knows. But when I first pulled up the distribution for that game, it was looking at it said that 11 was the hardest to roll, and 22 was the hardest to roll, and 12 was the hardest to roll, and I was like, but why? Because I was looking at 6-sided dice. I wasn't looking at a double-sided or a double width dice. Oh no, I'm fading. So really, when you're studying these games, you have to really look to see what dice they were actually using. You can't just read, oh, it's a 6-sided dice. It's a 6-sided rectangular dice, not a 6-sided cubic dice. Makes a big difference. All right. I think I've babbled enough about D6s there. Now, after that, the wording on the slide could be, let's see. Yes, okay, so Viking brings up a great point here. My wording is terrible, sorry about that. So the wording on the slide could be somewhat better. The probability is even for a single die. However, it does vary as you add more dice. Yeah, I talked about that a little bit, and I'll update that slide. Thank you for that, Viking. So the probability of rolling a 1 through 6 on a single die, which is what I meant by that, is the same. The probability of rolling a 2 through 12 on 2 dice is determined on a bell curve. So which means with the 7 being the highest probable in the middle. Thank you for that, Viking. Always keeping me honest out there in the audience. All right. So looking at the rest of our timeline. 150 BCE, we have the first Egyptian D12 found in the same period from the D20 previous. 100 AD, we found the second oldest 20-sided die. This is an ancient Roman D20. They actually sold it at auction for almost $18,000. I want that D20. That's a very expensive D20. 1000 AD, we find dice buried in Viking grave mounds. Obviously, that's not the 1000 AD. I don't think it's when they maybe where they came from. I've seen multiple dice from that region or that time period in that sort of in those grave finds. Vikings, the Norse peoples used a lot of dice and played a lot of different dice games. So there are a plethora of dice in the grave finds. Unfortunately, a lot of them were made of wood and things like that. So a lot of them probably degraded. All right. So a little late period, 1600 AD or CE in this case. Dice first subject to mathematical analysis by Galileo. So again, this is a Galileo invented dice sort of conversation again, right? I'm sure people were doing dice analysis before this, and people were doing the math in the streets. Sophocles and Palamedes did some of it earlier, but Galileo did a lot of work in the 1600s about the theories and probabilities because they started discussing the math of it, right? This is really when they started actually looking at probability and documenting probability. 1888, out of period for us, but this is a really a neat little factoid here, and everything obviously passes out of period, but sort of show you where dice have come from. 8-sided poker dice. So this has literally poker card faces, and so you could roll it and get a hand of cards based on the dice roll. I've seen some games like this that are a more modern version of this. I think it's a neat thing to do. Cards are really intimidating for a lot of people. It's one of the things I like about dice games is they're usually really easy. So that would have been a very easy dice game to learn. Realistically, we do this with Knuckle Bones a lot. And again, we're talking about like Cock and Feather. Gaming Tavern, we'll do, you have to get like a full house or 2 pairs with Knuckle Bones. You have to have 2 2s or 2 3s or 2 4s or whatever. Very similar to these poker dice, right? When you're trying to get some sort of poker hand and 2 pairs beats a pair or 3 of a kind beats 2 pairs. Same idea. So I would guess, no proof of this, I would guess they were doing that somewhere in period as well before these poker dice existed. But that's a neat little transition point there. 1906, 10-sided dice was patented in the U.S. This is the first patent for those. 1950 is the oldest plastic D20, numbered 0 through 9, but it was 20-sided. So you see a 20-sided dice with different numbering on it. 1974 is when D&D published and sold the first set of Polyhedral Dice with their games, numbered 0 through 9 with no D10. 1980, Gen Con first 10-sided dice claimed to have been invented. Clearly, that's not the case since the first patent was in 1906. But it might be because they were using some different sided or the different kind of D10. Who knows? Nerds like to claim they did things. 1985, the Zakihedron D100 is released. So it's a ball with little sides on it. I can't roll those things. They'll never stop rolling. And of course, the more modern 2012, we have the people who put out this thing. They did a 10,000 roll ChessX versus Game Science randomization test, proving that ChessX dice were at that time, in fact, more random. So there you go. I think it's interesting that they actually spent and took 10,000 dice rolls. Maybe we'll do that as a fundraiser here on the show one day. We'll take some Knuckle Bones and see how many times we have to roll them to get truly random. You guys want to watch me roll dice for like 4 hours one night? So yeah, I think dice are a really interesting thing, right? I enjoy games of skill. I enjoy playing TOEFL. I'm not a huge fan of chess. I've talked about that before. It's too complex of a game. I know how to play. I'm fairly decent at it. I've proved that. But I don't enjoy it. It's not a game I can play with everybody. It's a game that's intimidating for most players. So I enjoy games that take a little bit of skill away, right? So having a die, having some sort of random number generator makes the game easier. It makes it easier to play. But there's always a weird balance of random versus skill. So games like Candyland, right? There is 0 skill to play Candyland, or Shoots and Ladders. 0 skill to play Shoots and Ladders because you really roll dice and move your guy. There's no choices. But even games like Roll Game or Senate, that there is still dice rolling. There's still a choice, right? You still have some sort of strategy there. Now you may be forced at times to move certain things. You may have limited choice. But there always is some sort of choice. So the player feels like they have some sort of control. And I like that. I like having to maintain some control and some skill because it allows more players to play. It allows more players to feel like they're doing good and feel like they're involved in those decisions. Versus games like I would say when you're playing chess or the sort of more complex game like that, players just don't feel like they're involved. It's a lot harder to break that game. And obviously my goal here on this channel, my goal in life is to have more people involved, have more people playing. So I think that's all I've got for tonight. You guys out there, the 4 or 5 of you that stuck in, I appreciate all of you for tuning in. Make sure to like, subscribe down below, or pop over to YouTube if you're watching me on Facebook and click the like and subscribe over there. I do want to thank, and since you're all here tonight, I'll thank all of you. Thank you all for helping Cowboys Corner hit 300 subscribers. We're actually at 307 as of this morning. I never expected to be here from the 50-ish I started with the first couple of shows. Just super jazzed. I don't know. I got asked the other day about what it's like to be popular, and I was like, I'm not popular. I'm just some nerd talking about weird stuff on camera. So, but you nerds are all hanging out with me, and I appreciate you for that. So again, like, follow, comment, subscribe. Look us up on Patreon, patreon.com/KK Productions. If you're a patron out there already, check your emails for an email from yours truly about your board game rewards for this month. They're pretty snazzy. Hold on, I think I've got them. Nope, they're put up somewhere. Anyways, so pretty snazzy. I upgraded them from our first cuts to a much better design, including some new dice, some custom D6s for the games. I'm super happy with them. I was not happy with the first set. So also look us up on Redbubble. Redbubble.com. Just search for Calvars KK Productions. They do not provide good links. So we've got some stickers out there. I'm gonna get some more things. We're gonna do coffee cups and shirts and that. I've got to figure out how the image sizing works. That's the whole thing I'm not good at yet. But yeah, look us up out there. Buy a sticker. There's one with my ugly face on it. There's also one with some quotes from What Makes a Night and a couple of other shows that are on KK Productions. Saga Saturdays, Outlands Royal Tea, And then the Do Nightly Things from What Makes Nights also out there. It's a pretty good sticker. And I'm sorry, Ask the Nights Live as well has a sticker. So look those up, buy a sticker. All that money goes back into the shows to helping support, buying mics, buying cameras, replacing things, paying for websites and hosting fees, all that stuff. So we appreciate your support and keeping the SCA dream alive. But I'm going to close out for now. Thank you all for joining me. This has been Cowburger in Cowburger's Corner. Night, everybody.